time, many yearn to break free of the prison of a flat, secular materialism, to see and to know reality as it truly is. What is this spiritual reality like? How do we engage with it well? How do we permeate everyday life with spiritual presence? Orthodox Christian priests, Father Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung, host this live call-in show focused on enchantment in creation, the union of the seen and unseen as made by God and experienced by mankind throughout history. Welcome to the Lord of Spirits.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Lord of Spirits podcast, where we're going to be taking a voyage into the underworld. I'm Father Stephen Damick in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, and joining me tonight is my co-host, Father Stephen DeYoung from Lafayette, Louisiana. And if you're listening to us live, you can call in at 855-AF-RADIO. That's 855-237-2346, and we will get to your calls in the second part of today's show. Last time on Lord of Spirits, we introduced the idea of sacred geography, including some mind-bending regarding what it means to be, that being is a verb. Tonight we're going to be taking a journey into the underworld. But first we're going to do a little recap to summarize and hopefully clarify some of our points about what it means to be being and exactly what human consciousness has to do with what we like to call objective reality and what all of that has to do with mantis shrimp. Yes, you heard me. Mantis shrimp. There were a lot of questions from last time. So help us out, Father Stephen. When we say that human consciousness produces the world, are we saying that the world is just the matrix, but we're the computer?
No.
No. Oh, okay. Okay. I feel like most of my lead-in questions at the beginning, you just say no.
Yeah. So, and as you said, if people are listening live, they can call in with any questions they have. If you're listening to us dead, you probably don't need to listen. You could just kind of look around.
That's right.
And see the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight.
Indeed. Yes. Have a look around. Tell us what it's like.
Tell us where we're wrong. We talked about last time about the fact that the world that we live in, so the world for me, the world for you, right, is not just this sort of objective thing that's out there.
Yeah.
But the world that I live in and interact with is the product of my human consciousness and certain tools that my human consciousness uses. We talked about language, art, music, and ritual to construct that world.
Right. Right.
And so some folks, I think, took that to mean like we're all living in a hallucination, or
yeah,
the
it's
Matrix,
a group hallucination,
or like if I just and I was trying to counter some of that with, I know I've referenced Heidegger a few times, this quote about the brute facticity of reality. Right?
Yeah.
You can close your eyes and wish really hard, but you're still going to hit that wall when you walk into it, right?
Yeah, right. And I think one, like, especially since we know we have a lot of fans who are also fans of the work of Jonathan Pageau. Hello, Pageauvians. He wrote an article a number of years ago called "Most of the Time, the World is Flat." Now, Jonathan Pageau is not a flat earther. But what he means by that is that your experience of life in the world is that it's flat. Like, if you actually experience the world as being curved, then that would be very disorienting, for one thing. And, part of that, of course, is the experience of, for instance, the sun coming up in the morning and going down in the evening. Now, from a quote-unquote objective point of view, that's not what the sun does. The earth turns, right? But we don't experience the earth turning. Like, I don't currently have the sensation of going however many thousands of miles per hour the earth goes, right? I feel like I'm stationary. In fact, here the sun is in the process of going down. And that is what my day consists of. And it's not an illusion, right? It's not an illusion. But it's what my actual conscious experience of the world is. And even like the human body has ways of you've got the what do you call it, circadian rhythms, which of course, if the last thing you do is you look at your smartphone before you go to bed, then you're throwing your circadian rhythms off. But that's an example of part of what we're talking about, right? And we're going to even talk a little bit more about things that we can't even detect, even with equipment and so forth. But that's what we mean, is there's a sense of, it's not just point of view, it's what you're actually able to experience, not just what you imagine.
And there's an actual interplay, right? So we talked about how a created anything, right, has an internal order, right, that makes it what it is, and then it's part of a web of relationships, right? And so when I encounter people and animals and plants and things out in the world, I'm not encountering like the totality of those beings.
No, right.
And I'm definitely not encountering what it is to be that being. Meaning, when I see a bat, right? Like, I still have no clue what it's like to be a bat. But also, I'm not, by seeing a bat, taking in the totality even of the external, right, properties of a bat.
Yeah, you can't even detect all of the bat's energies in the world, to say nothing of what bat essence is in itself. Right.
I'm encountering certain parts of that web of relationships, specifically how that thing relates to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so and that's true of everything and everybody who I encounter. Right. I know my wife, and knowing her more intimately means I understand a greater part of that web of relationships, but I still don't know what it's like to be her.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Like, I can't enter into her subjectivity. Right.
Yeah.
I can't enter into her essence, as it were.
Right. And so we've already then, kind of hinted at using these words, but just to connect it to a piece of Orthodox theology, that if you're Orthodox, you've probably at least heard of this. There's what's called the essence energies distinction. And often, most of the time in Orthodox theology, people talk about essence energies with relationship to God. We cannot know God in himself, right, in his essence, but we experience him in his energies. But I remember, when I was in seminary, I think it was Dr. Harry Busalis, who was a great professor at St. Tikhon's, by the way. I think he was the one who said to us one time, he said, you guys have essence and energies too. And everyone was like, whoa, and, think about describing another person. The only things you can say about that person is the way that you experience them. He does this, he acts this way, he seems to have this kind of personality. It's his operations, to use the Latin-based term, his energies, his working in the world, that is what you experience. But his inner essence is not something that's knowable to you. Only God knows the inner essences of all things better than they know themselves, actually. So there, you don't know them as they know themselves, and you certainly don't know them the way that God knows them. And I think one of the problems of the modern scientific viewpoint is this illusion of objectivity, suggesting that there is this possibility that we can know things as they truly are, or more likely that we just sort of reduce, just all the things that we don't actually see. We just assume that that's not even part of what it means to be that thing, right? The thing is just the material in front of us or whatever, for instance, So the essence and energies distinction is exactly what we're talking about. It's exactly what we're talking about.
Right. That's the separation between, that order, that being put in order is what it means to be, as we said. And essence in Greek is just the participle for being. Right. So that's that internal ordering. The web of relationships to everything else, that's where we encounter everyone and everything that we encounter. Yeah. So we don't know what it's like to be another person. We don't know what it's like to be a bat. We don't know what it's like to be a tree. We don't know what it's like to be the earth, right? I don't want to go too far down the panpsychist trail, but That's where the sleep. But we don't know what it's like to be an angelic being. We don't know, who's in charge of one of those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't know any of those things.
And we definitely don't know what it's like to be a mantis shrimp.
Right. So we used the example of color and last time, and I think some people got hung up on the details, maybe. But we're going to come at it from the other side with our friend the mantis shrimp. Okay, so mantis shrimps have these amazing eyeballs.
Yeah,
that's a human and most other higher mammals have 3 sets of photoreceptors in their retinas.
right. So for us, it's RGB: red, green, blue, and everything that you see is some combination of red and/or green and/or blue.
Right. And
I used to do lighting design in theater, and literally everything that we did was a combination of red and/or green and/or blue. Everything.
Right. And birds have 4.
Yeah.
Which helps them see in low light.
Mm-hmm.
But
is it ultra? Are they in infrared? Is that what they can see?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
It's like night vision goggles for humans.
Nice.
And mantis shrimp have 12 to 16.
Man.
So they can see, it's not just like, they can see infrared and ultraviolet. They can see more colors like beyond that we don't have names for.
Right. And it's not just a matter of seeing 12 to 16 colors. Because remember, we
right.
the colors we see are basically all combinations of 3. So they can combine those
12 to
16.
Yeah. So, and I also mentioned to you right before the show started also that we have binocular vision. So each of our eyes produces an image and our brain puts them together. Each of their eyes, they have 2 eyes, but each eye produces 3 images. So they actually have 6 images that their brains put together with all of those colors.
Yeah, it's a good thing that these things are only about the size of a small kitten. Because otherwise, and because like there would be these vicious monsters that would be incredibly good at hunting, and and they are very aggressive. By the way, you don't want to keep one in your home aquarium unless you have like a bulletproof glass, because they literally can shatter the glass. And if you keep anything else in the aquarium, it will be attacked and eaten.
Yeah. So apparently, being able to see all the psychedelic colors doesn't make you cool and peaceful.
How about
it just
that?
Helps you be a better jerk and hunt. But the point of bringing up the mantis shrimp, beyond we're not turning this into a nature special. David Attenborough coming in and doing the narration, is that right? So those other colors, right? Let's say, rough estimate, there's 48 other colors, right? That a mantis shrimp can see that I can't. Okay, if the mantis shrimp had language, it could name those, and mantis shrimps could describe them to each other, right, and talk about those colors. I can't. Like, I could make up names. I could be like, okay, the one right above ultraviolet is ultraviolet. But then if you say to me, okay, Father Stephen, describe ultraviolet, I got nothing.
Yeah, all you can say is sort of positionally where it is, which is the same as our, the Earth turning. We can take photos of it. We can take video of it if we put a camera out in space, but we don't actually see that happening. We have to imagine it happening. But imagining is not the same thing as seeing it.
Right. And so if we say there's a handful of those colors that the mantis shrimp is the only creature that can see, and then let's say we go and exterminate all the mantis shrimp because they're starting to grow and they're looking like they're going to take over, right? So we go and exterminate all the mantis shrimp. Those wavelengths of light that produced those colors for the mantis shrimp will still exist. Right, those wavelengths of light and radiation will be out there in the universe, but that color will no longer exist
because no one will see it.
The color only exists because there's a conscious mind that can process that wavelength of light into that color. Right. The color is produced by that interaction of the light that is there and the consciousness that is there. And so this is what we're talking about when we talk about the world we live in. Sometimes the word holographic is used by philosophers, but that will give people the wrong impression again. They'll think it's a holodeck simulation. This isn't simulation theory. But that the world we live in and function in every day is therefore produced by the interaction of our human consciousness with the world that's objectively out there.
Right. And I think it probably we I don't know, correct me if this is wrong, the only one who can objectively see all things would be the Lord.
Well,
I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, maybe.
Yeah. So the problem is when we talk about the subject-object distinction, we're talking about created beings.
Yes, right. And he's not,
Right. So...
Yeah, I can only imagine that God like we talk about God seeing all things. Yeah,
right. God transcends that subject-object distinction because God, for example, does know what it's like to be a bat, even though he hasn't been a bat.
Yeah, right.
Strictly speaking.
He knows the essences of all things.
Yes. So, relatedly, right?
Yes. Why is all this important?
Point 2 of our brief review is space and time don't exist.
There we go. Good night, everybody.
Yeah. So
this show is over before it began.
Right.
I know. So, these are the episodes of Star Trek my wife hates, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Little shout out to her.
Usually the writers just do a lot of technobabble.
Yeah, right? They just punt.
Inertial stabilizers and Heisenberg compensators and all that stuff.
Exactly.
So, what does that mean? Well, right.
That space and time are our experience.
I don't want to just sit here and be like, hey man, let's blow everybody's mind, right? Because you're not all mantis shrimp looking at weird colors out there. But space isn't made out of anything.
Yeah. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
And time's not a thing exactly.
Neither is time.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I say they don't exist. They're not things, right? So space and time are categories and are ways that humans, because they're finite, right? This is related to what we were just talking about. We don't know things as they are in themselves, only how they present themselves to us, because we're finite.
Yeah.
So in the same way, because we're finite, we're limited in terms of both space and time. Okay?
Yeah.
So this is what I was getting at last time when I was talking about how we tend to think of the past ceases to exist and the future doesn't exist yet, and there's this ever transitory moment that exists now, right? But
could you say that time keeps slipping into the future?
Yes. Just trying to make this as trippy as possible. So everybody have their black lights and their posters. Yeah. So that's not correct.
Yeah.
Right? What we find, and this is why I've mentioned a few times now, Book 10 of St. Augustine's Confessions, his understanding of time consciousness, right? So it's not how time works, it's how human consciousness of time works, how the human experience of time works.
Right, which, I mean, everybody's had the experience of it feels like time flies, or that something is going very slowly, and, and then I actually watched a video about this just the other day. It was the voice of Steve who showed it to me. It was this guy talking about how when something is really dull, it seems like time goes by very slowly. But when something is very engaging, it seems to go by very quickly. But then when you try to remember those times later, that you remember the engaging time much more fully than you remember the dull time, because in the dull time, there was much less to remember.
Right, you didn't form memories. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so, like, this is just one example, and you could just say, oh, well, that's just perception. I'm like, well, that's what we're talking about.
Yes, time is just perception.
Right.
Time is just perception. So there's a bunch of qualifiers to this. And again, I don't want to just be like, hey, let's blow people's minds. But there's what's referred to as deep time. So let's say hypothetically, I'm just going to throw this out and never pay it off. But let's just say hypothetically that geologists are right. The Earth has been here for billions of years. Okay. While there were no created conscious beings on the planet, that saying billions of years is meaningless. There was no time. Because there were no conscious beings to experience time.
There you go.
Anyway, so, and I'll never pay that off because I hate talking about creation and evolution. It bores me.
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, this show actually is about the Underworld. But as with all of our shows, there's a massive setup. Yes, this is still just the recap. But there was lots. There were a lot of questions about this in our Facebook group, which is very helpful, right? So we kind of we can see how you guys are hearing what we're saying, and then maybe try to fill in some spaces. So that's
calibrate
what we're doing here.
Before we take the next step.
Yeah, exactly. Now I say fill in space, but of course there's no such thing.
Right. So if you understand time in this way, and I know we have some people who identify as philosophy nerds. So for those folks, this is the B theory of time. Yeah. All points in time exist in the same sense that all points in space exist. Meaning, right, like I don't sit here and say, well, Lafayette is real and Emmaus is not real yet, or used to be real, but isn't anymore, right?
Right.
If I get on a plane here in Lafayette and fly to Philly to come visit you, when I depart Lafayette doesn't cease to exist.
Right.
Right. And then, like, Philadelphia Airport comes into being, and then it recedes, and Emmaus comes into being as I travel, right? We would never say that about space. We understand the same is true about time.
Right.
Okay. So this gets to what we were talking about in terms of ritual, and one of the specific ways that ritual interacts with, again, we're talking about that interaction between our human consciousness and the reality that's out there. That really is out there. One of the ways that it acts upon it is that ritual will cause a particular place and a particular time to become not just sacred space and sacred time, but a particular sacred space and sacred time.
Yeah.
So the burning of the incense in the temple made it paradise. It became paradise in that space for that time. On Holy Thursday, your local parish church, even if it's in a storefront, or even if it's a cathedral, or if you go to a monastery, becomes Golgotha for a period of time.
Right.
And not just Golgotha in terms of place, Golgotha in terms of time. So we say, today this is happening.
Yeah, which is why then the actions that people, let's say, for instance, you mentioned Holy Thursday, the cross is placed in the center of the church in the Byzantine practice, and people come and venerate the cross. It's not that stands for the cross of Christ. It is being the cross of Christ. And think about iconography in the same way. Iconography, by the way that you interact with it, is being the encounter of the saint for you. At that moment. So that's why then the fathers say, well, the veneration shown to the icon passes to the prototype. It's because it's becoming, the prototype is present for you at that moment, like not just in a symbolic in the sense of this stands for this. It's not like a dollar sign, when a dollar sign stands for money, but you can't spend it. It's not like that. It's actually is present, this ritual participation. So this is why all this matters. I know it's all very mind-bending stuff.
Yeah.
This is why it all matters.
Symbol doesn't mean one thing that allegorically represents another.
Right.
Or analogically represents another. It's when two things are brought together.
Yeah.
One thing becomes the other.
Yeah.
And I'll throw out one more tease, even though I said earlier I wasn't going to do this to everybody. But tease for a future Relics episode.
There we go.
Because time doesn't exist, any given thing that exists in the world is itself throughout its existence and is wholly present throughout its existence. This is how relics work. So St. John Chrysostom's hand is St. John Chrysostom.
Yeah. I mean, I visited 3 years ago. I went on pilgrimage to Mount Athos, and among the probably several hundred relics that I venerated over the space of a week was the hand of Saint Mary Magdalene, which not only is incorrupt and flexible, but maintains body temperature. So some relics just do this more obviously than others, right?
Right.
Some of them, it's very, very intense.
Right.
Yeah, this is why relics work. They're not,
Right.
it's not a souvenir. It's not a talisman.
Right.
It is the person.
And so when we're talking about God and God's eternity or God's transcendence or God's ubiquity, we're not talking about, for example, I know some people heard us and thought, oh, you're saying God is outside of time. That's sometimes how it's said.
Yeah.
Right?
Like
So-
time is this bubble and the God is outside
Right,
the
there's
bubble.
this bubble of
looking
time,
down at
space
it.
that God says. But outside is a spatial category. So
Yeah.
you can't be. That's like saying you existed before time. Well, before is a temporal category, and
Yeah.
so the language that's used for this, and it's used in the Fathers, and this is developed especially by Father Dumitru Staniloae, whose last name I probably mispronounce every time I say it. But
Write in and tell us, Romanians, exactly how to pronounce it.
yes. Well, we have a Romanian friend who may be messaging me already, but he talks about how God's attributes are supra, not super, but supra essential.
Beyond
Meaning,
essential. Yeah.
right. Meaning it's not that God is everywhere, like he's just really big and spread out all over the place. Right. But that it's that spatial categories don't apply to God. So it's equally true to say that God is everywhere, right? And that there's not a place where he isn't. And also to say that God is nowhere.
Yeah.
It's saying there's not some particular place where we as humans can localize him.
Yeah.
Right? This is that our finitude versus his infinitude, right? Lack of finitude coming into play. But so, as we said, this is how the idea of sacred time and space that we talked about last time works. A particular time and place, a particular day is made a sacred and holy day.
Yeah.
Right? And that first time, right, is when that spiritual event, that eternal event, first manifested itself in human conscious experience. But then that reality is made present again and again ritually.
Yeah, and that's a super important point, because sometimes people say, well, why do you have all these holidays? Isn't every day holy? Or isn't every place holy, right? And the problem there is when you say everything, now on one level that's true, right? That everything has become holy. It's all become dedicated to God. But when people say, well, isn't every day holy? It's like saying, well, isn't every day your birthday? Then that means we never have a party. And then we're never actually celebrating my birthday, which might be a good idea. I don't know. My birthday is always a fasting day, but
let me suggest the alternative approach to that problem, which is you could have a party every day.
Every day, right?
So we could make every place and every time holy.
Right.
We could do that. I'm not so good at it.
Yes, right.
I'm not so good at it, but we could. This is what St. Paul is getting at. When St. Paul talks about some people honor Sabbaths and new moons, right? The holidays, right? The holy days.
Right.
And then some treat them like every other day. We as modern people read that like, oh, I don't have to do that stuff.
Yeah, in other words,
I could
let's
just be
cut
lazy.
out. Yeah, we just cut out the ritual participation.
Right. I can just treat every day like Monday, right? Work day,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, but it's the ritual participation that actually makes our experience of it happen.
Right. St. Paul is saying, no, some people celebrate these holy days. There are other people who make every day a Sabbath.
Yeah.
Make every day a celebration.
And that's one of the reasons why, by the way, like I know this has been on people's minds, especially this last year where so many of us were limited from coming to church. I've heard some people say, well, Pascha happened anyway, even though you weren't there. And like on one level, that is true. It is true. But on another level, you have to you have to recognize that when you don't get to ritually participate in it in the way that you normally would, that there is an actual poverty that has happened there, right? So, you know, whatever you think of the particular policies of your individual church, you know, there is an actual loss if you're not there participating. If you skip church on Sunday for whatever reason, even for a really good reason, it's still a loss. There's still something broken, fundamentally broken, because you didn't get to ritually participate in it in the fullest way. Now, certainly you can pray at home, and that is a ritual participation, but it's not the same as, for instance, receiving Holy Communion. It's simply not the same. It's not the same, you know. So, this is what's behind all of that, right? That's why it's a horrible poverty when you can't be in church, or when a church is destroyed, for instance, you know. So, right. You know, because I mean, you know, what would you say if a church is smashed? Say, well, every place is holy. What does it matter? It matters because that place is used for that ritual participation, and now that's been prevented in some way, right? You know? Yeah.
So,
we said all that so we could say this.
Yeah. So that's the review. That's the catch up, right? That's what we were talking about last time with sacred time and sacred space. Yeah. So tonight we're going to be talking about the flip side of that, which is profane space.
Profane. And profane's a great word. Profane's a great word. It's so profanum, it literally means that which is outside the temple. Yeah.
Outside the camp, outside the place that we've preserved under the bubble, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But that's why people have that sense that they shouldn't use profanity inside the church. It's literally contradictory. Yeah. You know, if you're going to cuss, please go outside. No.
What if you cuss in a foreign language? Does it count?
Yeah, right.
And which languages count? Can I cuss in Klingon?
That's a language where every word sounds like a cuss word.
Yes, that's true.
Profane time and space.
Yes, and so we've got a little bit of quick review here too, just to pick up some concepts we've already talked about on the show, I think like several times. And that's, we've talked about how when we sin, we're participating in the energies and the works of demons, right? And we're bringing those works of demons into reality, right? This is another part of that. We as human conscious beings, we bring that then into the world. And when we do that, that not only transforms us, that breaks down that internal order, right? And shifts who we are and corrupts us, but it also, through that web of relationships we have with the rest of creation, leaves this sort of metaphysical taint, this sort of stain on the created world where that has happened. And so with these places where demonic rituals, where events of great evil and things have happened, there is this taint. And just as when we ritually purify a place and make it sacred space, it participates in another sacred time or sacred space. When we do this with profane space, that space participates in that profane time and space, meaning it gives demons access to it. It gives, this is why people experience various kinds of quote unquote, we've already attacked this word, but supernatural phenomena around places where these sort of horrible things have happened. Right.
And I'm like, I'll give you an example where when I was in seminary, a couple of my fellow seminarians met a guy haphazardly out in public who you know, one of the seminarians was wearing his cassock, and he said, "Hey, are you a priest?" And he turned out to be. And he said, you know, there's a problem at my house. And he invited him over, and you know, he talked about sort of a feeling of evil and you know, things moving around and all this kind of classic haunted house kind of stuff. And, you know, come to find out, it turned out that the previous owner had actually killed himself in the backyard or something like that. And so the priest did a house blessing, and then he also went out into the backyard and prayed a memorial prayer for the person who had killed himself. And there was this immediate change in the experience of the place, that it literally felt lighter and airier. This is what the person who went there and did this told me, you know. And so like there's this, you know, that this action of suicide. Now I'm sure that leading up to this suicide was probably a lot of darkness. You know, there's this taint. It became profaned as a result, and so it needed to be cleansed, right?
Right, and this is what's behind from the very beginning, and we talked about this back in our Halloween episode. The church coming and rededicating these pagan sites,
right,
and making them sacred, but burying the martyrs there, dedicating churches and shrines there.
Yeah, or like the Parthenon in Athens, which we know of it as a temple to the goddess Athena, but actually was a Christian church dedicated to the Theotokos way longer than it was ever a pagan temple. So we still have that one in Nashville that we have to take care of. But,
we won't talk more about that. Anyway,
yeah, right.
But yeah, so what there isn't, so there's sacred space and there's profane space. What there isn't is neutral space.
Yes, no such thing as neutral space.
There is no neutral ground. There is no, place that is not one or the other.
Yeah.
And so this is, as we talked about it, us going back to that Halloween episode, this is part of our mission as Christians, is to go out and reclaim the created order, and make it sacred and make it holy again.
Church at all.
Yeah, not just ourselves in terms of repentance, but also reclaiming the world around us, that web of relationships to everything else. So before we take our first break, can we do some quick samples?
Yeah, let's do some
spaces?
examples.
Profane Spaces, name 3. So the first one is probably the one that's most familiar to people familiar with the Bible and or theology, or especially Orthodox theology in Greek, and that's the Valley of Hinnom, a.k.a. Gehenna.
Right. Yeah, because Ge means valley, right?
In here,
Gehenna, valley. Yeah, it's like when people say Mount Fujiyama. Like, that's Mount Fuji Mountain. Don't say that.
Yeah, or chai tea. But anyway.
ATM machine, yeah. Right.
Yeah. Department of Redundancy Department. So and Hinnom, by the way, was a guy. He shows up in Joshua. He was just a dude who
guy
who lived there, who it was named after.
Oh man, what rotten luck!
Yeah, he got his name stuck on it. Right, it's like being one of the guys who Judas baptized. It's like, I don't want to be a Donatist, but seriously,
Oh man.
So, Gehenna, of course, the valley, the valley outside Jerusalem, is one of the most infamous places in the Old Testament, because it was there that the Israelites, meaning the people of the Northern Kingdom in particular, and even also the Southern Kingdom, came and sacrificed their children to Molech, by passing them through the fire.
Right.
And
That's
God obviously condemns this. Yahweh, the God of Israel, refers to them as his children. He says, you have offered my children to Molech, right? They weren't theirs to do with as they pleased. But this is about the worst satanic ritual you can think of, right?
Yeah.
If you want a demonic ritual, this is high up there, right?
Yeah. Child sacrifice.
So, but it's not just that like these horrible things happen there, so it's a bad place, right? Because when you read, there is in 2 Kings chapter 23, there's just a description of them doing this. But in Jeremiah 7 and Jeremiah 19, where the prophet Jeremiah is specifically coming at the Judahites before the exile, this is one of the things that's going to finally prompt the exile, so that God can purify the land from the people of Judah.
Yeah. Wow, man.
And so when he talks about, Jeremiah lays out what they've been doing, which of course they know, right? And this edict against them. And then the language he uses then is that the what's going to come upon them as a result is that their own bodies are going to end up in Gehenna. And not buried there, but laying out in the open, being eaten by wild animals.
Yeah, which
unburied, uncared for.
Yeah, yeah. The which is, like the worst possible fate for a dead person in the ancient world.
Right.
Which is, Yeah.
And if you read elsewhere in the Old Testament, not only is that, of course, a curse, but that's what's used to describe Sheol, the underworld, right? That's the language, right? So, for example, in the Psalm, right, their bones are scattered by the side of hell, right? They're not buried; they're just scattered out there to the winds. When you read in Isaiah, Jeremiah, elsewhere, it talks about this is how Sheol the underworld is described. So this judgment isn't saying, hey, you specific people who specifically did this, every one of you individuals is going to end up dead and unburied in this valley.
Yeah, no.
At these GPS coordinates. Right? It's what it's saying is they have turned that place, Gehenna, into hell. They have turned that place into Sheol, the underworld, the abode of evil. They've invited the demons there. That's the place it is. And so that's where they're going to end up. That's where they're going to spend eternity.
And you know, there is actually, from the Germanic tradition, there is actually, you know, the Old English word orc, which I'm sure will be familiar to a number of our listeners, referred to a kind of demon in Old English, referred to a kind of demon that hung around in the underworld and ate corpses. So it's literally this kind of thing. That's what an orc is to, you know, an Anglo-Saxon person. And of course that actually shows up in Beowulf and other stuff like that.
Well, and in the Gospels, right? The demoniac running around in the tombs.
In the tombs, exactly. He's basically being orcish.
The place of the dead. Right, so that's what's going on. This place has been made that, right, by what they've done there. So another example, I don't think we've talked. You could correct
I don't think
me
we've talked about this on this show. No.
So
if you're a reader,
in the cinematic universe.
Yeah, if you're a reader of Father Stephen's blog, the Whole Counsel of God blog, there's a piece he wrote called Tabor and Hermon that covers what we're about to talk about.
Yeah,
this is this gateway to the underworld. That's a particular mountain. Mount
Hermon, which you can go visit. I don't recommend it because it's right by the Golan Heights. It's not a safe area to visit, especially right now. But
although I gather there's a ski resort there or something. There is. No, there is. I looked this up actually. Yeah, I don't know. That's weird.
This mountain is there, and if you do go there, there are still all these ancient pagan shrines from all these different periods all over the mountain.
Yeah, there's something about that mountain.
Back to the old Canaanites, all the way up to, and the name comes from haram, which means banned or forbidden, which is the same word as haram in Arabic. Right? Yes. So it's like the forbidden mountain, the cursed mountain. This is where Azazel gets the other angels together to hatch their scheme in the Book of Enoch. Is on top of this mountain. And at the base of this mountain, there's an ancient spring that was considered a gateway to the underworld and featured a pagan shrine from the Canaanite period all the way through to the Roman period, where it became a shrine to Pan.
Yeah, good old Pan.
And that area is still referred to as Banias, which P got turned into B. It was Panias, but now it's Banias.
That's because Arabic speakers can't say.
Yeah, there's a tendency to pronounce a P as what we pronounce as a P as a B. And so there's this gate to the underworld, and the place where this comes into effect is this is near where Caesarea Philippi was, and so that famous moment in the Gospels when St. Peter makes his confession as to who Christ is,
right.
And he refers to the gates of hell not prevailing against the church. He was standing a few yards from this particular gate to hell.
Gateway to the underworld.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was one nearby.
I feel like this is a major Paul Harvey moment, right? And now you know the rest of the story. Good day.
Good day? Yeah. So
that's for my dad, who was a big Paul Harvey fan.
So and this place actually was, the Byzantines came and built a church there. Right, the Romans came, the Roman Christians came and built a church there and rededicated it, in order to again make it sacred space instead of profane space. And then the third example just because people get excited when we talk about giants. I think they get ecstatic when we talk about werewolves.
Yeah.
So,
but this is not the werewolf episode, everybody. Sorry.
No, more tantalization on its way. There is a mountain in Greece, Mount Lycaon,
which basically means Wolf Mountain.
Yes, Wolf Mountain, but it's actually named after a person,
a guy. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
named Lycaon, and on top of that mountain is the oldest known Greek altar. And here's how old it is. It's so old.
How old is it?
Yeah, it's so old that it was referred to in Greek as the Bimos. Bimos is not a Greek word. It's not even an Indo-European word. It's the Akkadian word, bima, for altar, that was brought over into Greek. We talked before about Katharsia being brought over from Qatar in Akkadian. It's a general truth that the very earliest layer of all religious vocabulary in Greek is actually Akkadian. It actually comes from Semitic.
Oh, man. So are you saying that you can't give me a word, any word, and I show you how that word... No. Sorry, guys.
This is a Greek word. Yeah.
And then on that altar, they're doing human sacrifice.
They did human sacrifices, and you can read the Greeks about this because they considered it a dark and evil place because of this.
Yeah, right. Greek pagans.
That this fella Lycaon performed human sacrifice there and engaged in cannibalism
because sacrifices are meals.
Yeah, which often goes with it, and so was cursed and became this sort of wolfen creature, i.e., he's sort of the first werewolf in Greek thought. So he becomes this sort of wolf-like, rapacious, cannibalistic creature, possessed creature from having participated in this ritual. So even, like I said, the pagan Greeks considered this place of sort of darkness and evil that you didn't want to go around.
Right.
But it's been rededicated. There's a shrine to Saint Elias there now.
Because
the prophet Elijah.
Yeah, because if you're going to fight demons up on top of a mountain, Saint Elias is your man.
Yeah, he has experience.
Yeah, exactly. He knows what he's doing in this.
So even that space of pagan has been sort of reconsecrated and taken over.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and go to break in just a second here. When we come back, we're going to actually start taking some of your calls. But in the second half of Lord of the Spirits, we're going to be talking about why is the underworld, and what is it under? So let's go to break.
Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung will be back in a moment to take your calls on the next part of the Lord of Spirits. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
This is an Ancient Faith Radio public service announcement. Orthodox Christian Fellowship, OCF, is seeking qualified candidates to apply for 2 full-time positions as part of their national ministry team, a communications manager and a ministry coordinator. Candidates should be Orthodox Christians in good standing with their parish/jurisdiction who are interested in furthering the mission of OCF to provide opportunities for college students to encounter Christ. Full job descriptions and applications can be found at www.ocf.net/join-our-team. Inquiries about these positions or recommendations can be directed to Executive Director Deacon Merrick Simon at Merrick, M-A-R-E-K, at ocf.net. This has been a public service announcement of Ancient Faith Radio.
We're back now with the Lord of Spirits, with Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung. If you have a question, call now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Thanks for that, Voice of Steve. All right, we're going to be talking about why is the underworld, and what exactly is it under. But first, we're going to take one of your calls. So I believe Brett is calling, and he has a question about astral projection. Brett, are you there?
Man.
Yeah, I'm
this guy.
You're local to Father Stephen, aren't you?
I don't know if I can make that claim or not. I don't know if he'll take me, but I do know Father Stephen.
So what's your question there, Brett?
My question is, since we've been talking about time and place, how does this relate to the concept of astral projection that we know from either popular media or interactions with paganism, neo-paganism specifically? And what's the demonic influence of that, and how it all relates in together with how we experience time and place? Is it a thing, basically, as well?
Is it a thing? Like, is it a thing? Is it a thing? Or, like, is astral projection a thing?
Like, I know it's a concept, but is it beyond a concept? Is it something that can actually be experienced?
Yeah. I mean, so before Father Stephen gets the will, actually, I mean, certainly we can see, like, there are visions, for instance, that some of the saints have had where they experience being in some other place than they really are, right? That God gives them that experience. I don't know if it's something that happens in other contexts for sure or not. So, Father, I don't know. What do you say?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking Doctor Strange right now, like astral projection. Yeah,
like,
right.
As long as we're talking about it in terms of astral projection and not remote viewing, right, then we're okay. If you want to know about remote viewing, go watch Men Who Stare at Goats. It's hysterical. Major Ed Dames.
I haven't seen that yet, but I keep intending to.
Is a heroic character. Yeah. So now we definitely are coast to coast AFR. Now that I brought that up, like, for sure. So what's usually termed astral projection, right? So the way it's talked about a lot now is and in terms of New Age spirituality and neo-paganism and that kind of thing, is that it's a technique by which one is able to usually go somewhere else in the world. That's why the connection to remote viewing, right?
Yeah.
To be present, to have your consciousness be present at another place and or time than where your body is currently present. But the astral and astral projection comes from, originally, it had a lot more to do with, like, what you were just talking about, Father Andrew, the idea of, like, apocalyptic visions and that kind of thing, and ecstatic experience, because, of course, astral refers to the stars.
Stars, yeah.
Right. So it was referring to this kind of transcending of time and space, in the sense of having that kind of mystical vision. So we have to say that does happen, right? That happened to St. John, right? In the book of Revelation. That happens to the prophet Ezekiel, the prophet Isaiah. I mean, right?
Right.
So it's not just, basically, this is an example of what we've been talking about ritually, going the other way, right? So we've been talking about ritual in terms of, through ritual, we make the time and space where we are to be a particular time and space, whereas the ecstatic experience is an experience of me departing from the time and space where I am and being in that other space, right? So rather than our ritual experience in worship bringing paradise here, I leave here and go to paradise, right? And am taken to paradise, right? In this sort of visionary experience. So that happens, but it is not something that happens when it's happening legitimately by virtue of practicing certain techniques.
Yeah, that's
right.
Sorcery.
Right. And so inevitably we're going to do an episode on the noose, and in that episode we'll probably talk about this, and we'll talk about Kundalini yoga and all that crazy stuff that people want to hear about. And the Kundalini serpent and all this, pineal gland stuff. But
Oh boy.
but for now, this is something that happens sort of that is granted to certain individuals by the grace of God in his timing in order to communicate certain things. It's sort of God taking the initiative to bring certain realities into the realm of human conscious experience.
Yeah.
Rather than humans taking the initiative to enter into the place where God is, which is what we're normally doing in worship.
Right. So does that make sense, Brett?
It does. It makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, fathers.
You
Awesome.
can ask. You can ask up to 3 follow-up questions at coffee hour.
All right, thank you for calling, Brett. Okay, so we're going to take another call right now. We have Matthew, who I think is calling from Germany, or I'm not sure where exactly he's calling. Matthew, are you there?
Yes.
Where are you calling from, Matthew? Yeah.
Yes. Freiburg in Germany.
You are calling from Germany. All right. It has got to be late at night over there.
Well, got to listen to the Lord of Spirits podcast.
Well, that's what I think.
Guten Nacht.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Matthew, what is your question from over there in the Germanic lands?
Yes. So I know that you've said before the main distinction between veneration and worship in an ancient understanding was that worship consists primarily of 2 things, sacrifice and offering incense, which is why you also said Protestants really mostly participate in veneration, and why only God receives the sacrifice and the incense. So this raised for me 2 questions. Is it not offering incense to the saints when the thurible is swung before the icons of Mary and the other saints? Mm-hmm. And second, if worship is primarily these 2 things, then why was it such a big deal for the 3 youths to bow to the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, or Mordecai to Haman, or the Jews before the bronze serpent, for example?
Yeah.
Since that would be veneration and not worship per se.
Well, that's a good question. So, to the question of sensing icons, for instance, when you sense an icon, you're not worshiping the icon, right? You're not offering a sacrifice to the icon. Instead, what incense is being used for is for this purification function, right? So incense is not a sacrifice that's used in the same way as the sacrifices that are eaten, like the Holy Eucharist, of course. It's used in a different way to purify. Right. So, in our episodes on sacrifice, especially the one we did on the Day of Atonement, we talked about purification a lot. So you can go back and listen to that. Excuse me. So as to your other question about why was it not okay for the 3 holy children to bow before the idol that Nebuchadnezzar set up? Well, you don't want to venerate the image of a demon. That's just a bad idea. You don't venerate demons. You don't worship them either, right? But so, for instance, remember in the 10 Commandments where the Lord said not to bow down to them nor to serve them. That's actually 2 different actions. Don't bow in front of them and don't offer sacrifices to them. So neither one is okay, right? So, bowing in front of something is an act of veneration, and it becomes worship then when it becomes bound up in this question of sacrifice. So I don't know, Father Stephen, did you have anything you wanted to add or correct or whatever?
Yeah, I'll add. Yeah, in terms of the purification with the incense, one of the reasons why we have these censings where we go around the whole church is that it's part of the ritual we're just talking about of making it sacred space. The space has to be purified in order to be made holy, and so the incense in the censer, the smoke from the incense in the censer, is performing the function of the blood of a sacrifice. Right. So the incense was offered on the altar of incense, and then incense and coals from that altar were taken and put into a censer and then taken out and used for this purification, in the same way that the blood was drained from a sacrifice that was being offered, and then the blood was used to purify, right, the tabernacle or the temple, the physical space, to rededicate it and to cleanse it. So that's what's going on with the smoke. I would also point out that while obviously eating food offered to an idol is participating in the sacrifice, right? And we see that in the book of Daniel too, where they basically become vegetarians. They won't eat the king's food because it was all offered to idols. But that there are other ways of participating in worship, right? So I've got a bunch of catechumens right now. They can't receive the Eucharist yet in our church, right? Till Holy Saturday when they're received into the church. So they're still coming to liturgy. They're still coming to, like, last night we had a pre-sanctified liturgy, right? They come, they're not participating in the worship, right? They're not there as spectators, right, to the worship that's happening. Right, they're participating, but how are they participating? Well, one of the ways they're participating is during Lent is they're making prostrations. Right, they're making prostrations, they're singing along with the prayers, they're praying along with the prayers.
Yeah.
Right.
The context is super important.
Right. So even if you're not doing the action, right, only the priest is actually doing the action of offering the sacrifice. Right, in one of these pagan situations. Right. And then there are various ways that the people can participate in that. They might march in the procession with the sacrificial animal. They might eat the meat afterwards. They might go and offer prayers to the god while the sacrifice is going on. While that individual act that they're committing, right, the bowing or the praying or the processing may not be worship in and of itself, by that action, they're participating in the worship, the sacrificial worship that is going on. Right, in proximity. Does that make sense?
Right.
All righty. Well, thank you very much for calling, Matthew. We're honored that you are listening to us in the middle of the night over there in Germany. So great to hear from you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, why is the underworld, and what exactly is it under?
Yeah. I'm imagining that there was a group of people out there who thought finally they're going to talk about vampires and werewolves, and we're talking about a totally different underworld.
Yeah,
and there's like small legion of disappointed Kate Beckinsale fans out. Like, man, their eyeliner's going to start running when they get disappointed. No, we're talking about the actual underworld, not the criminal underworld either. But
the only Twilight we're going to talk about on here is the Twilight of the Gods.
Right, the regions under the earth. Right.
Yes. Right. That language is in Scripture. It talks about it as being the pit, right, or under the earth, or like even the word Sheol, grave. It doesn't that refer to something that's sort of deep. Right. Is it about
grave.
Depth?
You bury people in the ground.
Yeah, in the holes in the ground.
And we talked about this when we set the Wayback Machine for the Neolithic era. That even then you see people being buried in the ground with grave goods.
Yeah.
Meaning both that they thought wherever this person's life went next, it was down there somewhere, and they were clearly not going to cease to exist because they gave them stuff.
Yeah, you're going to need this in the world to come.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is universal.
Yeah, right. Almost no culture doesn't bury. Are there any ancient cultures we know of that don't? Of course, what evidence would there be? But everyone's burying their dead, as far as we know, in the ancient world.
Right. This is and there's one exception in the ancient world that you mentioned, being the Zoroastrians.
Zoroastrianism, where they have something called sky towers, where they would build these towers and put the bodies up there to be
eaten by
animals and elements, and But was the Romans thought that was deeply weird.
Everybody else thought they were complete wackos for that.
Right. Right.
So that exception sort of proves the rule, right?
Right.
That everyone else thought they were bizarro. It was like mirror universe burial. In your Canaanite ancient Near Eastern background, you have Sheol, the grave, right? But it's not just referring to physical graves, obviously, right? People go into the grave. There's other beings there, right? And so it's this realm of the dead. And this is the place where the demonic beings are. So going all the way back into Sumerian literature, there are demons who are seen to the way the demons show up is they crawl up through cracks in the ground.
Yeah.
They come up out of the earth, right? Or come up out of the sea, right? But they're all below level, right? You have the mountain of God, and then you have these things that come up from below. And so in this understanding, in the ancient Near Eastern understanding, when you go into Sheol, you're going to the place where all those folks live and hang out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's much worse than Sartre. It's not just other people. It's these guys.
Yeah. Right. And it's why down there? Like, what does that mean? Well, you remember last time we talked about the mountain of God, and all ancient peoples regarded the gods as living up on mountains. This is the inversion of that. Literally, the inversion of that. It's what's down there, what's underneath.
Right, and you have the stars in the heavens that we've also talked about, and then this is then the inverse, right?
Yeah.
And one of the chief residents that shows up a lot in the Old Testament are the Rephaim, who we've talked about before, who are some of these dead giants. But these are not just in Scripture as the spirits of these dead giants. We have Ugaritic ritual texts for when their king died. The Rephaim, they regarded as their ancient kings who were part divine, right? They regarded them as dead giants. And they were worried about their king who just died because these guys were going to come meet him at the door when he got down there.
Yeah.
And these guys were not nice guys. Right?
Yes, right.
So,
they remembered them.
Like all of the demonic spirits and all of these dead tyrants and all of these evil beings who they spent a good portion of their time trying to ward off magically and ritually in this life and keep away from them, right? And keep away from their crops and keep away from their children. That's where they were going when they died. Right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty bleak. Right.
Yeah, and so you've got this image of sort of demonic beings torturing people down in hell. That's where which like is it's the cartoon hell, right?
Yeah.
It's the hell that Bill and Ted go to in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. That's the first movie was so much better than the second, but that's where this comes from. It's this this image.
This is pagan. This is pagan hell.
The pagan
not
hell.
Christian hell. Not even medieval Christian hell. They got it from the medieval pagans they were converting in Western Europe.
Yeah. Right. Right. So but that's not the only version of the underworld that there is, right? There's also like a much more complex one that you see in Greek myth where the term Hades is used, right? Yeah.
And Hades is the name, of course, of both a spirit, right? A god, right? Small g, a spirit, and the realm that spirit oversees, right?
Yeah.
Which the place of its dominion.
Yeah. Which when, sometimes people argue in like liturgical translations, should we use the word Hades or the word hell to refer to this? And I understand the argument in favor of Hades basically because a lot of people have this image of hell, but at least etymologically speaking and traditionally and historically speaking, both words refer to the place of the underworld and both words refer to the god that is in charge down there. And just Hades just happens to come from Greek and hell comes from Germanic language. The one exception that's a little different is in the Germanic world that hell is a feminine being. So if you're familiar with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you remember that's Kate Blanchett, right? So
I was about to say that if there were a ritual by which you could make like the 9th century present, I think you would do it. But then I remembered that that's the SCA, so you probably already
yes, no, that I could do that. Yeah, no, yeah, and Sheol is also the same thing, right? There's a god that is Sheol, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's both a god and a place in these historical usages, right? Yeah,
right. And so there's not the sort of like slasher movie quality to Hades that there is to Sheol. Right. The Hades, you get more images of sort of sadness, regret, forgetfulness, woe, sorrow.
Yeah, shadows, darkness. Yeah.
Imprisoning me. Right. I cannot live. I cannot die. That's a reference someone will get. Right. And I noticed that in our brief notes here, you put teenage emo / goth hell, which is accurate. Accurate to something we discussed, but I feel the need to distinguish between an emo and a goth.
Oh.
Okay. Silver Sun pickups and Bauhaus are not the same thing.
Okay.
Not at all.
Oh, to me, goth is a large German barbarian with an axe.
Right.
That's really what a goth is, but yes.
Well,
yes,
modern day goths would not survive that long against those goths.
Right.
But yes, this is you're appealing to the teenage no one understands my pain, especially mom and dad.
Yes.
I
God
write
bless
bad
them.
poetry that doesn't rhyme.
Right.
Kind of phase.
Yes.
Right. And that's, yes, it's every day is like Sunday, all silent and gray. Right. Everyone's sad and depressed. And that's that's one angle of Hades.
Right.
Right. That it's
Right.
sort of, and then Hades, right, the shades, the shadows, literally, of people sort of go there and live this kind of shadowy existence for as long as they're remembered, and then as their memory fades, sort of so do they.
Right, and that's the reason why in a previous episode we mentioned these shrines that were at various pagan cities to heroes, where they would pour down blood to kind of feed their memory and keep them alive, because the hero would then still be present in the city by means of sort of doing this,
Right. Got to keep them going.
Yep.
So, I don't want to go there. So that, having discussed in general the place. So this is the Underworld. This is that place, right, that is made present in Profane Space. But this place has its own geography.
Yes, right. There's sort of neighborhoods in the Underworld.
Just like we talked about, there's Paradise, the garden with tents in it on top of a mountain, right? That there is a certain geography, right?
Yeah.
And really, a lot of the apocalyptic literature we've briefly mentioned, and inevitably we're going to have an episode on the Book of Enoch, etc., are sort of tours of this geography, right?
Right.
In both directions. So also Hades, Sheol, the Underworld has this geography. And it's not just in general that because these horrible things have happened here, these places become hell, but specific places become specific places in the Underworld. There's a correspondence between these specific places and those specific places.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Abyss, which is, of all the places in the Underworld to be, it's the worst. You don't want to go to the Abyss.
It is the bad place's bad place.
Yes, right. Right. Yeah, and it shows up. It's in every ancient mythology in one way or another, with slight differences in terms of the way that it gets talked about. But like in the ancient Near East, so this is obviously kind of ground zero for a lot of what we discuss. It's down underwater, right?
Right, because the water is chaos. So the sea is chaos. The depths of the sea is, right? But that doesn't always play out in terms of sea like the Mediterranean. Sometimes it does.
No.
But, for example, we've talked about the Apkallu stories, that these were sort of the ancient Near Eastern version of the Titans, or the angels who rebelled with Cain's line. They're in the Apkallu story, the Babylonian version of the story, they're imprisoned underneath the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Yeah, in particular.
At the bottom of the water. So, big thing of water, right, down at the bottom.
Yeah.
In the abyss.
And some of my ancient ancestors, God bless them and forgive them, the Balts, they, and actually a lot of people in Northern Europe did this, they had this sense that gods were down there, not just under the waters, but under kind of anything that's watery. So like bogs, especially swamps. And they would sacrifice things down into the bogs, including people. They would put various things down there, but including people, they would put them down in there. And the idea was to sort of send them to the gods, right? Because down there in the underworld, and so I mean that's a pretty macabre. You're connecting with some really awful gods if you're sacrificing to underworld gods. Yeah, you're like even a pagan has a sense that he's connecting with a demonic, horrible creature.
Right, and surely to ward them off.
Yeah, right. Please don't come up out of there
when you're connecting with them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jonah fits into this, right?
Right. Yeah. I don't think this actually isn't ruins your Sunday school. This is, I think, vastly improves your Sunday.
Makes
school.
It way cooler. Yes. Right.
I think that people still have this mental image that Jonah gets like eaten by a fish and like he's sitting inside the fish like Pinocchio in the whale in the Disney movie.
Oh man!
Like with a campfire or something. And
yeah, like there's somehow enough air down there. And,
right at the bottom of the ocean. Yeah. So here's what actually happens in the book of Jonah. Leviathan, Lotan, right? The chaos sea monster eats Jonah and he dies. Jonah is dead. And it swims with Jonah's corpse down into the abyss, right? It says it's between the pillars of the earth. Those are the pillars that are holding up the dry land. So he's down in there in the underworld, right?
Yeah.
And so when Jonah prays, he's praying not just from Sheol, he's praying from the abyss. Right? Out of the depths, right? That's
out of the depths have I cried unto thee. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's deliberate. That's deliberate when it says that, again, like, we're all about helping people who are going to Orthodox church services, parts of it light up, right? That's in Vespers. Out of the depths have I cried unto thee, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. That's the depths we're talking about.
Right. And
way, 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 way down.
And so it's death that vomits up Jonah when he comes back out. And so when Christ talks about the sign of Jonah, he's not just making this allegory where like, okay, like, so imagine the tomb is a fish and,
and there's 3 days. So yeah.
Right. And yeah, there's three, but it wasn't actually 3. It's kind of on the 3rd day. How does that work? Right. That's not what's going on there, right? It's again very literal. On our next episode, we're going to see that a lot of the things that you thought were analogies and allegories in the Pascha Easter services aren't. They're literal.
Are not. Yes. I'll have to come up with another leading question at the beginning where you just say no.
Right. This one's literal too.
Yeah.
Right. This one's literal too. So this is also the little bit of irony in the episode where Christ cast the demons into the pigs,
right?
Thereby creating deviled ham.
Boom.
Yeah, dad joke. Is that they
just let that one sink in, everybody? Deviled ham. Okay.
They plead with Christ not to send them into the abyss, right? And then he says, they plead with him, send us into the pigs instead. So he sends them into the pigs, and the pigs promptly run and jump into the sea.
Yes.
And take them to the sink and take them to the abyss.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and just as a reminder to everybody, this is where giants show up in the New Testament. Because those are giants. They're disembodied giants.
The spirits of dead giants. Dead Nephilim.
Yes.
But so as we mentioned with the Apkallu, right, the abyss is the place where these rebellious gods or spirits are imprisoned. So you see the same thing. The Greek version of this is Tartarus, where the Titans are imprisoned. It's I'm sure we'll do a Titans episode at some point in the future.
Oh, that would be so fun.
And all the Robin and Wonder Girl fans will be disappointed when they find out that no, it's the Greek Titans. I just like disappointing nerds.
Yeah, and there's of course a reference to this in the Bible in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, just put a pin in that, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved into judgment. So the word that's there for hell, we looked this up in the Greek, it's actually Tartarosas. So it's he casts them into Tartarus. So like this sort of neighborhood of Hades is there in the New Testament. It's mentioned there in the New Testament.
So it's not just a vague thing. St. Peter is here directly making that equation between the Titans and the angels who fell with Cain's line and saying they're imprisoned, right? He's correcting the pagan version of the story, right?
Yes.
But they're imprisoned in this place, Tartarus, to await the final judgment. So
and again, the abyss and Tartarus, these are just two different words for the same part of the underworld.
It's a pit. Right, it's the pit, which is the inverse of a mountain.
Exactly,
the direct inverse of a mountain. Right, is a an endlessly tall mountain has as its opposite a bottomless pit.
Right.
Right, a mountain which stretches to the heavens, a bottomless pit. And the abyss gets referred to a couple other places in Scripture. In Revelation 9, there's the angel who has the key to the abyss shows up, and he unlocks it and lets those guys out to sort of ravage the world there at the end, right?
Yeah.
And then in chapter 20, same angel shows up again, this time to imprison the devil.
Yeah, the furlough is over.
Yeah. So
everybody get back in.
And additionally, one of the rivers, we're going to talk about more rivers in Hades, but one of the rivers in Hades, the Phlegiston, is a river of fire.
Yeah.
That runs down. All of the rivers run down into the abyss, run down into the pit. But this is a river of fire that runs down into the pit, causing the pit to become a lake or valley of fire. Right? And the river of fire we see in Daniel. The lake of fire we see show up in the book of Enoch or First Enoch, and then it shows up in St. Matthew's Gospel. It shows up in the book of Revelation. In St. Matthew's Gospel and Revelation, it's specifically the lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Note, not humans, although humans can end up there. It's not created for them. It's created, this abyss is created to imprison those rebellious spirits.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's not the neighborhood you want to move into in the underworld. I mean, you don't want to be down there at all, but the best part of the underworld, in Greek myth, was referred to as the Elysian Fields. That's
the not
that's
so bad place.
Yes, the not so bad place. That's as good as it gets. Is the Elysian Fields, and of course there's, this is referenced in Scripture, not with that term that I can recall, but so for instance there's the gospel where we read about the rich man and Lazarus is in what is called the bosom of Abraham, right?
Which
so
is a colloquial way of referring to it, because what you see in the Old Testament is the hope is that when they go into the grave, they will rest with their fathers.
Yeah, exactly. Rest with their fathers.
And so Abraham is sort of the patriarch, right? He's the first father, right, of the people. So if you're in the bosom of Abraham, that means you're resting with the fathers, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their righteous seed, as the prayer of Vanessa
and even
says.
even pagans had the same idea, to go be with your ancestors. Like, this is sort of as good as it gets. It's not great, but it's as good as it gets.
But it's better than the abyss.
Yeah, way better than the abyss.
So,
yeah.
Right, and so the way this is described in the book of Enoch, when he sees Hades, he sees that there are these three caves, these sort of three subdivisions of where the people are in Hades when Enoch is sort of going on his journey. At that point, paradise is empty. He sees it, but it's empty. But there are these three caves, and so in one of the caves you have the bosom of Abraham. You have the righteous fathers, right, or the fathers of the righteous seed.
And apparently it's some kind of grotto or whatever, because there's a spring of water there.
Right, there's a spring of water there. That's what differentiates it from the other two parts for him, right?
Yeah.
They have this spring of water to sort of refresh them and care for them while they're there. And this is referenced obliquely in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus that you just mentioned, right? Because in the one area, the rich man is, the other area, Lazarus is, and the rich man asks for Lazarus to bring him some water, right?
Yeah.
Bring him some drops of water, because there's water where Lazarus is, in the bosom of Abraham, right? There's a spring. So that's kind of an oblique reference to this idea. And then, so there's that cave. Then there's another cave, which is sort of where the people are in a holding station, who, after the final judgment in the book of Enoch, are going to end up in the abyss. They're getting chucked in there with the rebellious angels.
Yeah, it's sort of the abysmal waiting room, like the DMV, essentially.
Yeah, they're waiting in the waiting room because they can't get out.
Right.
And so then this raises the question of the third cave.
Yes.
this in First Enoch, he has the idea in First Enoch that third group wasn't really righteous, but they're not really like demonically evil either.
Yeah, they're the okay people.
Right, and so they basically get perma-Hades, right? They're just in that cave forever.
Yeah,
right.
And
Which
this
isn't exactly great.
Yeah, I mean, and this exists in pagan stuff too, like in the Greek tradition. Oh, this is lesser known. Like, who knows this? There's something called the Asphodel Meadows, which again sounds like a neighborhood. We just moved into Asphodel Meadows, dear.
Where everything is mediocre.
Everything
we
is.
We watch the same VHSs over and over again.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I've just started watching WandaVision, which we referenced last time, and I feel like it's kind of an Asphodel Meadows sort of place, actually. I'm only halfway through, so no spoilers, okay?
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
No spoilers. Yeah.
But yeah, it's not.
Don't tell him about Captain America showing up.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not limbo in the later sort of sense of limbo, like in the medieval Roman Catholic idea. Like, it's not that, but it's a limbo-ish kind of place. It's the land of meh.
Yeah.
You know. Right.
It's sort of Dante kind of has a limbo like that, right?
Yeah.
Where like Virgil's hanging out and like all the pagans who he really likes and doesn't want to see in hell, even though they were pagans, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like he can't bear to put them there. But generally, when they're talking about limbos in most medieval theology, they're talking about the limbo of infants, that's unbaptized infants, or the limbo of the fathers. And the limbo of the fathers refers to like Abraham's bosom, that place we were just talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So these words kind of move around a little.
Yeah, but so that kind of limbo, even though it's around, that kind of idea is around in paganism, and it's around even in Second Temple Jewish literature, like the Book of Enoch. It doesn't really get picked up by Christianity.
Right.
That kind of idea of neutrality, right, doesn't really carry over.
Not a thing. Yeah. Yeah. So I should just say here now that we've taken this little tour of the neighborhoods of the underworld, that it will probably occur to a lot of our listeners to wonder exactly how all this fits into questions of eternal salvation and eternal damnation. And to that, I'm just going to say, wait until next time. So, all right. Well, that being said, then we're going to go ahead and take our second break, and we'll be back with the third half of The Lord of Spirits.
Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung will be back in a moment to take your calls on the next part of The Lord of Spirits. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Doxamut Online, Tolkien, Enchantment, and the Christian Life, an ancient faith event. For the Christian, the enchanted or sacramental worldview is critical to a wholesome, full life in Christ. The work of fantasy author J.R.R. Tolkien provides a shaping for the imagination and soul that contributes to this vision. Join the hosts of Ancient Faith Radio's Amansul podcast in this special online event that explores how this shaping happens in partnership with the St. Basil Center for Orthodox Thought and Culture. The webinar will take place on Friday, May 7th and Saturday, May 8th, and speakers include Dr. Cyril Gary Jenkins, Father Andrew Stephen Damick, and Richard Rowland. The cost is $30, and registration will close on Wednesday, May 5th at noon Eastern. To secure your spot, please visit store.ancientfaith.com/Doxamut. That's store.ancientfaith.com/Doxamut.
We're back now with the Lord of Spirits, with Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung. If you have a question, call now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Welcome to the third half of The Lord of Spirits. We're going to be talking very soon about some of the architecture in the underworld and also what happens as you cross over. But first we have Daniel calling from Tennessee. So Daniel, can you hear me?
Hello. I appreciate your taking my call.
Absolutely. What's your question, Daniel?
Well, I have wondered about something ever since I was a young lad, and that is that there was a denomination which I won't name, but it teaches that I grew up a Catholic, though. It teaches that people, when they die, you probably have heard this theory, people do not go anywhere at all, but rather they die and they await the resurrection. There seem to be scriptures that support that. For example, Job said, I will wait till my change come. Though worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, and so forth. And death is always likened unto a sleep, and that supposedly the wicked, when they are punished, they are not burned. The punishment doesn't go on forever, but the punishment is certainly final because they are consumed in the lake of fire and are no more. And I just wonder, should I hang up and listen to you, or what would you like?
Well, you're welcome to stay on if you've got a follow-up question, but I'm going to go ahead and punt this over to Father Stephen. What exactly happens when you die?
So there's two pieces there, right? The first piece is sort of what's sometimes called soul sleep, and the second piece is what's often termed annihilationism.
Yeah, and we don't believe in either one of those.
No.
No. Okay.
But
I'm just gonna get that in.
Yeah. So soul sleep is based on. In addition to the passages you mentioned, taking some passages of the New Testament very literally, right? So Christians passing away, dying, is referred to as falling asleep in the Lord, right? So taking that very literally. One of the issues with that is, of course, that sleep isn't oblivion, right?
Yeah.
As Hamlet reminded us, right? You sleep perchance to dream, right?
Yes.
And so we continue to have conscious experiences while we're asleep. So the idea of comparing it to sleep doesn't mean it's some completely unconscious state, right? Like if you ever had surgery, they hit you with the stuff and you're out, right? It's oblivion, right? You close your eyes, you open them, you have no sensation of time passing, right? It's that like a period of time is gone from your life, right? But that's not normal sleep, right? That's
right.
And so that analogy doesn't necessarily mean that, right? Even if taken fairly literally. But it is also true. It is also true, and we need to push back against this. And the passage you quoted from Job is an important one in doing that. That the idea that people die and go to heaven or hell for eternity, that is a sub-Christian eschatology. That is not what Christians believe. Christians believe that we die and that when Christ returns, when Christ appears, I should say, is the better language. When Christ's glorious appearing happens, that all of the dead are raised bodily and stand before his judgment seat, and then go from thence bodily to eternal life or eternal condemnation.
Right.
We believe that in the in-between period, that the conscious experience of Christians doesn't cease, right? We're still finite, so we still experience things in terms of time and potentially even space. And so that conscious experience continues, and that conscious experience represents a foretaste of either bliss or judgment, right? That is coming, because our conscious state from our life continues until the bodily resurrection.
Yeah.
So the kernel of truth behind the soul sleep idea is that they're at least holding on to the idea of the bodily awakening part, which is better than a lot of folks do, right? They have this just bodiless eternity, right? Which isn't Christian. But they're a little flawed in taking the sleep idea a little too literally and in saying that, well, then there's just oblivion between when you die and when you rise.
Right.
So in terms of the annihilation question, this goes back to something we were talking about last time and that we've talked about before. And see, annihilationism, the idea that the souls of the condemned just cease to exist, requires an idea of nothingness.
Yeah.
Right? It opposes being and nothingness, existence and non-existence. And that polarity just didn't exist in the ancient world. They didn't have zero.
That's a later invention. I can't remember exactly when that was.
Was invented in India in the 4th or 5th century.
Yeah.
So they didn't have a zero. So they wouldn't say, I have 0 apples. Right? They would say, I am not having apples. I am not performing the action of having. So when they talk about something not performing the action of being, for them, being is opposed to chaos. Existence is opposed to chaos. Right? So in the same way that our being justified and being put in order by God represents becoming fully human, the opposite of it, the chaos that comes from participating in demons, what that does to a human is make them some human. It makes them less human. It diminishes their humanity. They descend into chaos. And so the images we see of like weeping and gnashing of teeth, weeping and gnashing of teeth isn't an image of being tortured. It's an image of madness.
Yeah, insanity. Right.
It's that lack of order, right? Complete lack of order and chaos and destruction. But so to cease to exist, to cease to be human, didn't mean void to ancient people, right? We can come up with the concept of annihilationism now, but it didn't mean that to ancient people. To them, it meant this descent into sort of this animalistic, and so that behavior is what you see with demoniacs, like in the Gospels. Right, they're living in this subhuman way. They're naked. They're running in the tombs. Unable to be chained. Right? It's that they've become less than human now. And so when Christ then performs an exorcism, we see they're sitting peacefully and in their right mind and clothed. Right? That order has been restored. They've been made human again in that internal order. Yeah. So I know that was a ton I just dumped on you, but I hope it answers your question.
Daniel hung up and took the call off the air. So
okay. So I'll just assume he understood it perfectly. Yeah. I nailed it.
So exactly. So we're going to take just one more call, and this is Michael, who has a question or comment about giants. Michael, are you there?
Hi there, Father. I really love the show. Learned a ton. I really appreciate it. I actually just had a quick question. I was recently read the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it mentions that Gilgamesh and Enkidu are both 2/3 God. So I'm assuming they're giants. And then I guess that could be something else. But then I thought of, what should I think of all the demigods and all the other mythologies? Like, is Achilles a giant? Is Odysseus a giant?
Yes.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, they're giants. Yeah, so if you Michael, if you haven't listened to our Giants episode, have you listened to the Giants episode, Michael?
I have. Look, back when it first aired.
Yeah, back in November. Yeah, I might suggest re-listening to it. And, one of the cool things, this is actually just to put a little plug up for this, people can sponsor our episodes for transcripts to be written. And so far, every single one of our episodes has been sponsored for a transcript, which is wonderful. And so you can read that episode if you don't want to spend the 3.5 hours. But why wouldn't you want to spend those 3.5 hours listening to that episode again? It currently holds the record for the length of any single episode on Ancient Faith Radio of anything. So,
although, hey, the night is young.
Yeah, that's true, right? We could keep. That's right. Let's just keep.
Especially out here on the West Coast.
But
there you go.
I will not just shine you on and give you an actual answer.
There you go.
Which is yes.
Yeah,
they're all giants.
Yeah.
There's Hercules Samson stuff going on. The people love it when I talk about Samson.
Oh boy.
But
you know who you are.
But yeah, they're giants, and in fact, they're so firmly giants that among the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls is referred to as the Book of the Giants, right? And it lists their names. Okay, and so this is from the 1st or 2nd century BC. Okay, they list Gilgamesh as one of the giants.
Excellent.
So this is more than a millennium after the Epic of Gilgamesh was written in Akkadian. That's how firmly Gilgamesh is a giant, and that memory was held.
Yep.
All right.
So does that make sense, Michael?
Yeah, that answers my question.
All right. Well, thank you for calling. We're always ready to talk about giants. It's just a rule.
Thank you, fathers. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for calling, Michael. Okay, we're going to take one more caller, and it's Pedro from Wisconsin. Pedro, are you there?
Hey, fathers, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome to the Lord of Spirits, Pedro.
Thank God. Long-time caller, first-time listener. I appreciate you taking my question.
Yeah. What's your question, Pedro?
I wanted to ask about the sort of the movement to the intermediate state, what that looks like, or I guess maybe not looks like. Looks might be the wrong word. But
I don't know. This is kind of what the third half of our show is about. So,
Yeah. What does it look like to a mantis shrimp? That's the real question.
or a bat.
Yeah. So, sort of the nature of that, I guess, the journey, right? The departure of the soul, the initial judgment, and the role that our guardian angel plays in that, the role that the saints play in that. We have a prayer at Compline where we ask the Theotokos to guide our soul when we depart, and so I'm just sort of curious about what that's all about.
Yeah. Well, we are going to talk about that a little bit in the third half, but particularly maybe the questions about angels and demons and, guiding along the way. I don't know. What do you think, Father?
Right. There's our tradition has that there's a 40-day journey or journey corresponding to a 40-day period that the soul takes.
Yeah, it's not like 40 24-hour periods.
Right. And the soul is aided in that journey by the prayers of the faithful and by the prayers of the saints. And if this was an attempt by you to Trojan horse toll houses onto my show, you're a bad person, and I hope you're ashamed of yourself.
We should add that Pedro. We should add that Pedro is one of Father Stephen's advisees in the St. Stephen's program. So again, this is someone that we know,
and who should know better, frankly.
It's okay, Pedro.
We still love
so
you.
I don't know if that helps at all, but we are about to actually talk about crossing over that river, so that should be pretty interesting to you.
Yeah, that is helpful. So,
okay,
and I look forward to hearing the third half.
All right, thank you very much for calling, Pedro.
Okay, with no further ado.
Yes,
third half.
Exactly. All right. Well, when I saw that Giants call in there, I mean, we do have that standing rule. So
yes. And I want to add a rule about astral projection calls, that just in general.
Oh.
And anything else tangentially connected to Major Ed Dames automatically.
All right.
Especially if Ed himself calls in, because I think he's dead.
Okay.
So now we're down to waterways.
Right. I mean,
which we've already mentioned a couple.
Yeah, most ancient mythologies, in order to get into the underworld, there's some kind of water that you have to cross, right? So, I always think about in Greek religion, and by that I mean Greek paganism. When someone's being buried, they put that coin on the tongue, and that coin is so that they can pay the ferry. Right, so they can get across the river Styx and make their way in. Otherwise, they just have to hang out on the shore, which, yeah.
And I don't know what Karen does with the money.
Yeah, right. I mean, does he? What does he spend that? I mean, who is he? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, he's just hoarding it somewhere.
It's a good question.
So,
well, the underworld is a place where there's hordes of gold coins and stuff, as we know.
Right, and so you got the river Styx, which if you fall into it, you kind of disperse, kind of thing, diffuse,
unless you're Achilles, right?
Chaos thing again. Well, he just got dipped.
Okay, yeah,
right.
He wasn't dropped, right?
That made him immortal, except we missed the heel that he was being held by, which is a rookie mistake as somebody who's baptized some babies. Right? That's poor form.
That's right. You got to get them all wet.
So there's this idea that there's this potential destruction at entry. So in the Egyptian stories, especially in the Middle Kingdom, this is the Sea of Reeds. This is if you're going to Grethor because you're a Klingon and you died, you're on the boat of the damned that sails you there because you died in dishonor. So that's another river, right, or right. waterway that we have. And then there's another one, the Acheron River, that actually sort of empties into a lake known as the Acherusian Lake.
Yeah, this is not quite as well known, I think, at least here in American culture, as the River Styx. But it does get mentioned in several places.
Yeah, it's actually more relevant religiously than the River Styx. And not the river, the lake, the Acherusian Lake. And there is an actual lake in northwest Greece.
Yes, right. We looked it up on the map. It's in northwest Greece. Yeah.
That you could go visit on holiday if you'd like.
Again, why would you do that?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's like the people who go skiing on Mount Hermon. Why would you do that?
But it's actually been identified with several different lakes, one in Italy, and that's because, as we've talked about, various lakes can be being the Acherusian Lake at different times.
Right.
The lake of the Underworld. And this water, like another river we're going to talk about, we'll talk about it now, the Lethe, is associated generally with forgetfulness. So in Plato's Phaedo, Plato, of course, believed in the transmigration of souls, more commonly known as reincarnation. So this is where your soul would get dipped in Hades to sort of forget about the detail memories of your former life. You'd retain some knowledge of the world of forms, like mathematical realities and these kind of things. But your detail memories of your past life would be wiped out. And if you were a bum, you could come back as a lobster or something. So
it's interesting to me that the bit of knowledge you keep is math. I don't know how that works, but
Plato was big on the math. He was probably a Pythagorean. This was Aristotle's big critique of Plato. Actually, was that he argued that first principles could not ultimately be derived from mathematics. Because mathematics couldn't justify its own first principles. But anyway.
That's what I think.
Yeah. Brief rabbit trail into metaphysics lambda. But so Plato has this lake performing this function of sort of purifying from the mind from the previous life to begin a new one. And so then we start seeing it pop up in Jewish and Christian literature. So one example of this is in the Greek life of Adam and Eve, where after Adam and Eve have been expelled from paradise, they repent. The sun and the moon offer incense and join their prayers in repenting with them. And the stars and creation repents. And as a result of that repentance, Adam is taken and washed or baptized in the Acherusian Lake.
Right, that's just crazy, but fascinating. I mean, that's wow. Yeah, right.
And so then the most important work of this nature that you've never heard of is called the Apocalypse of Paul, which was translated into a variety of languages, including Latin as the Visio Pauli, and the Latin version became particularly popular and important for medieval and Renaissance literature. But in the Apocalypse of Paul, St. Paul is taken on a sort of, like we talked about, this astral projection tour of heaven and the heavens and the underworld, sort of to see everything and to reveal that, right, through St. Paul. And when he comes to the Acherusian Lake, the city of God has been established sort of on top of it.
Yeah.
Sort of on top of the water.
That's
right. So
kind of cool. So it's like Lake Town in The Hobbit.
Right. So the lake is now so still, right? Again, it's this triumph over chaos, right? Order to even primordial chaos of the water. It's now so flat you can build something on it. And the city of God is built on it. And those souls that are going into the city of God are purified in the waters of the Acherusian Lake on the way. And there's a version of this. There's very clearly a version of the same text, but St. Paul has been switched out for the Theotokos, is having this apocalyptic vision. And Dante actually refers to that in the Inferno. At one point, Virgil refers to the time that the Theotokos came to visit.
Wow.
The Virgin came to visit, and he's referring to the this version of the Visio Pauli that had the Theotokos.
Yeah, and just to reference another piece of medieval literature that I know that a lot of our listeners love, in Beowulf, the house that Grendel lives in is eerily similar to some of the language that's in the Apocalypse of Paul. So there you go.
Yeah,
because that's where demons live, is the underworld.
So the fifth and final river is the Cocytus,
right,
which is associated with woe and sadness and Morrissey and Robert Smith and Manchester, England, and all of that.
So true.
But so the importance of the rivers is we have these 5 rivers, and unlike the 4 rivers that flow out from paradise, that flow out from the mountain, these 5 rivers, one of which is a river of fire, pour down into the pit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
they pour down
it's a big
into
sort
the
of
pit.
sludge of evil.
Flowing out and providing life, right? It's sort of parasitic and taking that life and taking it away.
Okay, so let's talk about a piece of underworld architecture, and with that, we're going to complete our conversation this evening. There's a palace down there. What's that all about?
There's a castle. Yeah.
Yeah. Why would you build a castle in the underworld?
Yeah. Yeah.
Although, if some of you kids out there play Minecraft, you can literally do that now. You can build castles, and they call it the Nether in Minecraft. But I mean, when my kids, they do play Minecraft once in a while, and I saw them building down in the Nether. I'm like, are you guys in the underworld? They're like, what? So, but it is. It's really kind of curious. So yes, there's a castle, there's a palace down in the underworld, and it's kind of funny that it should be there. On the one hand, why would you want to rule in the underworld? Like there's multiple mythologies, right? That where a defeated god gets kind of cast down into the underworld. It's like in the medieval period. You're defeated brother or uncle or whoever, you because he's still royal blood, he's still family, you give him some really terrible estate where nothing grows, and he's he gets to have a piece of desert or something like that, right?
Or a bunch of other gods conspire and murder you.
Yes, right.
And you end up there, but at least you're the boss.
Yeah, you're the king of the trash heap,
Right. Yeah.
Right, except one, right, who seems to he wins and he goes down there.
Well, with Baal, it's sort of the same thing, but there's a spin, right?
Yes.
Right. There's meant to do that, right? It's
right.
So Baal, right, goes up against Yam, the Most High God, and totally wins. Totally wins. And then he just happens to end up in the underworld and just happens to run into Mot, the god of death. And again, totally wins, and decides, hey, this is where I want to build my palace, is down here with the dead.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Believable.
Yeah, who wants to live on the mountain of the gods?
Plausible.
Yeah. Those guys, they didn't appreciate me anyway. I'm going to come down here in the trash heap.
And so this is super important because this is actually referenced in the scripture,
right?
Baal ruling from the underworld.
It's referenced in Isaiah. It's referenced in Ezekiel, and so in those stories, it's not only. And next episode, we're going to talk about some more of this. There's literal ridicule directed at Baal, because Baal is the devil in the Old Testament. Literal mockery.
Not a very ecumenical kind of language.
Right. It's not just like. Hey, we're going to correct the record. You actually lost, and that's how you ended up in the underworld. It's like, haha, like, nice try, with your lame claims that you wanted that to happen, right? Like, you're a loser. You know, no time for losers. We are the champions, right? Like, that's it, right? And like I said,
speaking of Zoroastrianism,
yeah, we'll talk about that more next time. But so, what of the prominent features of this palace? If you know one thing about this palace, or if you've heard one thing, whether it be having heard it from reading mythologically, or the way it's constantly referenced in our Orthodox hymnography, is that it has brazen gates.
Right. Gates made of brass.
Right. Which is counterintuitive, right? Because if you put me in a cage made of brass, I'm going to break out pretty fast.
Yeah, because brass is not that great as a metal.
Right. Like, it's not. I as a small child destroyed many a brass lamp. We'll put it that way. Right.
Yeah.
Like.
Right. Brass gates are not really good gates.
Right. So it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Why it would be brazen. And so to get into why and what this
why
means,
would it be brazen, Father Stephen?
We get to talk about giants.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
So
right.
Excited.
Right. So it goes back to the Bronze Age.
Right.
Okay.
We're not going back to the Neolithic. We're not going that far this time.
No. Yeah. It goes back to the Bronze Age. So bronze, as everybody remembers, because we all took metallurgy, right? Well, chemistry once upon a time. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. And it's a good, strong metal. It's great for making weapons out of and armor. And it becomes the definition of technology in that period. So this is what, 2 or 3,000 years BC?
Right, 2,500 all the way up to, you know, the toward the end of the second millennium.
Yeah, and you know, just to give you some sense of what civilization was like at that time, the copper that they used in this alloy came from Cyprus, and as I learned today, that's part of the origin of the name of the island of Cyprus. Actually, it refers to copper. I did not know that until today. And the tin that's used comes from Afghanistan. So if you look at your map of the Middle East, these places are not right next to each other. It has to be shipped. So there's a lot of transportation happening. There's a whole bunch of economy occurring in order to make these things, in order to be able to make bronze. A lot of shipping. I mean, a lot. We're talking big amounts of material in order to be able to make weapons and armor. You know, those are the most important parts of bronze technology. But there's other stuff like that. And then there's what's called the Bronze Age collapse.
Right. Well, in the height of the Bronze Age era, right?
Oh, yeah, right.
The old world order was so connected, right?
Oh, yes. I love this example. Yes.
Hammurabi, for example, really liked the Cretan style of leather sandals that the Mycenaeans used, right? He had affection for them. And so he got them shipped to him so he could wear his Cretan sandals. Hammurabi, the Babylonian emperor who had conquered Sumer and Akkad. But Hammurabi's important because Hammurabi was one of the Martu. The Martu were this group who came from basically what's now Western Syria, Lebanon, northeast Palestine, and conquered Sumer and Akkad. The Martu are referred to as the Amorites in the Old Testament. So
and Amorites are
giants.
Nephilim.
Yeah,
that's right.
So remember Og? Og was the last of the Rephaim, and his pal was Sihon, king of the Amorites. And what the Martus claimed to power, including Hammurabi, what their claim to power was that they held the secret knowledge from before the flood.
Yeah.
The knowledge that had come from the gods, the secret knowledge that had come from the gods before the flood, they still had it. Right. And so they themselves then have this, right, not just as giants, but this connection to the pre-flood demonic spirits. That's sort of their claim to power and fame. And so bronze is used after the Bronze Age collapse, once we get into the Iron Age, right? So we're not going to talk about the dating of the Exodus, because that's also something that bores me to tears. But the Bronze Age collapse probably happened after it, or was in the midst of happening. But there's debate there too, and it's sort of in Yeah. Anyway, where exactly you peg the Bronze Age collapse is also a big debate because it didn't happen. It didn't happen in one day, right? You had the Sea Peoples invasions. The Philistines were Sea Peoples. Anyway, so bronze after that becomes this symbol of that old world order. That old
the
ancient world order.
Ancient wisdom. Yeah.
Right. And so when we get Goliath's armor, when we get Goliath's kit sort of described to us in all this excruciating detail in 1 Samuel or 1 Kingdoms, you might wonder why, right? Who cares how much his broad spearhead weighed? And if you're learning Hebrew, you have to learn all these weird words you've never seen before because most of them are Greek loanwords. They're Mycenaean loanwords to describe his helmet, the kobah and stuff. So because it's describing them, number one, it's all this Greek-style Mycenaean stuff from before the collapse, but it's also bronze from before the collapse.
Right.
And Goliath is really tall. So this is all, hint, hint, this guy's a giant, right?
Yeah.
This guy's a Nephilim. This guy's one of these demonic beings.
Right. So that's the backing then for this idea that the gates of the palace of Hades are made of brass. Because what is brass? Yeah, not bronze, but brass. Because what is brass? It is the pleather of the bronze world, right? It's the fake, cheap imitation. It's shiny and pretty, but it doesn't do the job. So by just exactly. So by describing the gates of Hades as being made of brass, the scripture and our liturgical tradition is basically saying that they're made of flashy junk.
Right.
That
quote
pretends,
unquote wisdom.
Yeah.
That quote unquote wisdom. That quote unquote secret knowledge is trash.
All the scare quotes. Yes.
It's snake oil that the demons are trying to sell you snake oil.
Right.
It's a con job.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
Right. And so from the perspective of the Old Testament, and this is really where we're going to pick up next time, this palace is the devil's palace. This is where he's cast down. He's thrown down to the dust to eat the dust of the ground. That's the dust that Adam is going to return to.
Indeed.
Hebrews is going to refer to him in Hebrews 2:14 as the devil is the one who holds the power of death.
Yep.
That he is sort of the Lord of the dead, the ruler of this realm of the dead, as we come to the close of the Old Testament. And this palace isn't just a palace, but it's a fortress that's not really keeping people out, but keeping people in. It's a fortress holding captives. Those who, through sin, have become captive to death and to the power of the devil.
Yep, exactly. So, right. So that's our tour, a kind of a real estate tour, as it were, of the Underworld. Yeah, don't buy. Yeah, do not buy any. Yeah, right. It's not like Minecraft where there's valuable stuff down there. You don't want to go there. So, all right. So what does all this really mean for us? I mean, again, this show is not just weird, cool, nerdy Bible stuff. It actually has a direct relevance to our lives. And I mean, God willing, we've mentioned some of those relevances along the way, but I just want to, in terms of final comments, I think one of the most important things to get from this is that the image of the underworld, as it's presented in ancient paganism, and then it's picked up on in the scripture, right? The scripture comments on it. It presents it, the same image of the underworld, the afterlife. It is an image that has no hope, right? Sometimes people talk about various religions and they say, well, all religions basically have the same goal. Everybody's trying to get to heaven, and they're just different ideas about how you get there. That's nonsense. Ancient paganism has no concept of getting to heaven. A handful of super, super powerful, important people might get elevated to go be with the gods, right? Once in a generation, maybe. But for most people, there is nothing like that. There is just simply, you go to Hades, and if you're really bad, then you get to go be with the Titans down in Tartarus, the Abyss. If you're, really great, you get to be in the Elysian Fields, which again is not that great. But it's way better than being in the Abyss for sure. And then ancient paganism and some Second Temple Judaism has this idea of a kind of neutral-ish space for the people who are just kind of But in all those cases, it's still this sort of shadowy, forgetting, sad, existence, barely existence, right? That's what ancient peoples understood life after death was about. That's what they understood it was about. The difference that Christianity brings is to say, not that that image is not true, but there is a way out. And that is a revolution. That is huge. It does not get huger. When what everyone believes about the ancient world, about the ancient understanding of life after death, that this Messiah comes and says, I'm going to lift you up out of the grave, which it's prophesied all over the Old Testament, by the way. It's in the Psalms, it's in lots of places. But then, of course, comes in its fullness in the New Testament. That's huge, right? And this is connected very much even with the day-to-day experience of the Christian, where our day-to-day experience is about the forgiveness of God, about repentance, so that we can kind of conform ourselves to that forgiveness, to really truly receive it. That's not an option for pagans. I've said this many times in a lot of different places. If you do something that makes your God mad in the ancient pagan world, then you have either revenge to look forward to, that the God is going to get you, or you can attempt to appease him. Right? That's all. Those are your options. Right? And you may not even be given the option of appeasement. You've had it. But even if you don't particularly offend one of the gods, the hope for the afterlife is not. There is no hope. There is no hope. There's just this shadowy existence, and it might even be terrible, right? But the difference with Christianity is to say that the grave is not the end. It is not the end, that the underworld is not the end, that there is something else. There is a possibility for hope, for being lifted up out of that. And not to give away too much, but that's what our next episode is going to be about. Father Stephen, final thoughts?
Yeah, we on this show talk a lot about how the modern world and modern humanity has sort of forgotten about ritual and lost sight of it. But they haven't forgotten how to profane a time and a space. They haven't forgotten how to create hell on earth. If you were around for the 20th century, you should know that. Still very good at that. And that's because, as we said, there is no neutral space. You can declare yourself secular all you want. You can deny spiritual reality all you want. When you set out to create your utopia on earth, you're going to create hell. You're going to create a place that's filled with demons. This was true in the ancient world when Hammurabi or Pharaoh or Sumerian Lugal built a kingdom on the back of thousands of slaves and human sacrifices. This was true when Rome created a wasteland and called it peace. This was true when Lenin tried it, when Hitler tried it, when Mao tried it. Anytime anyone tries it, right, this is the result. This is what happens when we try to create paradise under our own power, is all we do is create corruption and evil. Because the opposite, bringing paradise to earth and turning earth into a paradise, isn't something we do by ourselves. It isn't something we do by techniques. Not ritual techniques, not artistic techniques, not by tweeting the right hashtags for your hashtag activism, not by voting, not by holding up a sign at a rally, right? God is doing it. God is in the process of turning all of creation into paradise, into filling all of creation with his presence, into setting everything in order. He's establishing justice. He's doing it. We don't have to try to do it ourselves through some technique. When we try, we do the opposite. All we need to do is to get on board with and participate in what God is doing. what he's been doing since before I was born, what he'll still be doing most likely unless Christ appears after I'm dead, maybe for a long time. But we need to be a part of what God is doing, and we do that through the means we've been discussing, right? If you want to change the world, if you want to transform a little part of the world into paradise, serve the liturgy, attend the liturgy, pray in your home, make your home a sacred space through prayer, make everywhere you go a sacred space, make every encounter you have and every interaction you have, all of your web of relationships to the creation around you, make those filled with love and mercy and gentleness and kindness, right? Because when we do that, that's when God is acting through us. And that's when actual change happens. That's when paradise actually comes to earth. That's when space and time actually become sacred and everything is transfigured and transformed. So that's my final thought.
Thanks. Well, that is our show for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you didn't get a chance to call in during the live broadcast, we would still love to hear from you either via email at lordofspirits@ancientfaith.com, or you can message us at our Lord of Spirits podcast Facebook page. We read everything but can't respond to everything, but we do save what you send for possible use in future episodes.
And join us for our live broadcasts on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific.
And if you are on Facebook, you can like our page and join our discussion group, leave reviews and ratings everywhere, but most importantly, please share this show with a friend whom you know is going to love it.
And finally, be sure to go to ancientfaith.com/support and help make sure we and lots of other AFR podcasters stay on the air.
Thank you very much, and God bless you.
You've been listening to The Lord of Spirits with Orthodox Christian priests, Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung, a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio. And I beheld, and I heard the voice of many angels round about the throne, and the beasts, and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power, and riches, and wisdom, and strength, and honor, and glory, and blessing." Revelation chapter 5, verses 11 through 12.